This is Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and today my guest is Senator Karen Sorensen. She is the senator for the Alberta Rockies. Hi, Karen.
Hi, how are you, Sarah? Really good to talk to you and see you today.
I know, I'm excited for our chat. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important for me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. So hi, Karen. It's nice. So I'm very excited for our chat today.
Me as well, Sarah. Thank you very much. And thank you for doing the land acknowledgement. I think that's a very important part of our processes today.
Thanks. We met several years ago, but I wasn't doing Madam Premier yet. And you were not a senator. You were were you at the time a former or current mayor?
I was a current mayor of Banff.
Yes,
at that
current
time.
mayor.
I served for 2 terms as a councillor. That started in 2004 and 2007. And then I ran to be mayor of Banff in 2010 and was reelected in 2013 and 17. Somewhere in there, that's when Alberta switched from the 3-year municipal term to the 4-year municipal term. So I've got these weird years. But yes, I ended up serving as mayor of Banff for 3 terms and loved it. I believed it was going to be the career of my life until things shifted a little bit last year. But I loved being the mayor of Banff. It continues to be such a privilege, and I'm still struggling a little bit even with the change. I'm very invested in what's going on in town for sure. Luckily, I love our new mayor, Corey DeMano, who you've also met, very progressive 35-year-old female. And she worked with me. She was a councillor when I was the mayor. And I like to say about Corey that I'm old enough to be her mother, but she let me think I was cool enough to be her friend. So we had a great time together. And I couldn't be happier that she ran and was so successful.
Yeah, I love watching everything that she's doing, and the way that Banff is transforming into an even more with a focus, I'd say, an increasing focus on climate issues and being, a pedestrian friendly place. Yeah. I think that when so many people, not only in Canada, but like our international reputation, one of the most classic images of Canada is Banff. Like that's like the dream. True. It's the dream. And I meet people in the store and I'm like, oh, where are you visiting from? Where are you going? And a very common answer is, we were at Banff yesterday, or we're going tomorrow. And we're so excited. We can't wait to see the water. And that it's a national treasure that has to be protected.
And a bucket list for so many people. And I know that. I think most Banff residents know that. We could get into the whole chat about the fact that we're in a national park and our purpose for being a municipality in a national park is to serve visitors. That's more along, I guess, my whole job. But it's very hard for me not to spin into that conversation because I am so proud of Banff and Lake Louise. And of course, we suffered. I still tear up during the pandemic. I know it was really, really horrible for everybody for lots of reasons, but when tourism is your only industry, and it was the hardest hit industry, and it will be the last to recover. It was very difficult at that time. So, and of course, those were my final years as mayor, was getting the community, or trying to help get the community through the pandemic.
Well, and so now, as one of Canada's and Alberta's newest senator, you are also, I would say, in my mind, an ambassador as well at the national level for not only the province, but for Banff and Lake Louise. So tell me, I'm very interested to hear the story about how this happened and the things that you've learned along the way.
Well, thank you. So you did mention that I'm Senator Alberta Rockies. So every province has senators and territories, and I am a senator for Alberta. I represent the entire province. Sometimes I'll identify as Senator Alberta Rockies, because we do have a couple of senators up in the north end in the Edmonton area, and we have currently one senator down in the south end, Scott Tanis, and Patty and Paula are up in the northern end. And there was Doug Black had been a senator in the Canmore area, Calgary-Canmore area. However, he has retired. So I like to use Alberta Rockies sometimes, particularly around my passion and my hope to really advocate for the tourism industry. And there really isn't another senator with as complete a tourism background as I have. Every senator is touched by tourism in their province or territory, but that was my career. And so in an effort to lift tourism up, I like to use Alberta Rockies. And I also use Alberta Rockies because of the impact of climate change on this area. Just touch on the fact that we are the headwaters, and glacial melt, et cetera, is a huge issue here. And I happen to be live in a national park. So the Alberta Rockies kind of extends from Jasper National Park through Banff National Park into Kananaskis, the provincial park area, and down to Waterton. That's how I define it. So that's why I identify with that. Yeah, do you want me to get right into how to become a senator? 101?
Yes, please.
So first of all, the Senate is an application process, and it wasn't always that way. And I know a lot of Canadians don't really understand what the Senate does, and I certainly am well aware that at times its reputation has been marred. However, in 2015, the Justin Trudeau, then the leader of the Liberal Party, previous to being the Prime Minister, he decided that he was going to make every effort to truly make the Senate nonpartisan. And that has a huge appeal to me. Municipal politics are nonpartisan. I have worked with every federal party that's been in power. I have worked with every provincial party that's been in power. I really do consider myself nonpartisan. And I, of course, like everybody else, would like to see the parties working closer together. So by doing that, he sort of took away the title for anybody who identified as a Liberal senator. He took the word liberal out. You were just a senator. And since then created a new process where you apply to be a senator, which I did in the fall of 2019. Just as an aside, I will say we do have a conservative senators group who still identify with partisan politics. And I would just say from my perspective, I'm hopeful that in years to come that we become completely nonpartisan. So you apply, you can go online and find the application. I knew I wasn't going to run for mayor again in 2021. So I didn't know what I was going to do next. Sarah, you and I had some conversations about working on corporate boards. At one point in my career, I had done a lot of facilitation and workshops and training and public speaking. And I thought about getting back into that line of work with a little bit more of a government focused. But I put my application in there, and you do that. It's quite an extensive application, and then you sit and wait. And so about a year later, I got an email saying that the committee that looks at the applications was going to start looking at Alberta. We were short 2 senators at that time. Alberta has 6 senators. At that time, we had 4, and for other reasons, we currently still have 4. But I can explain that after. So they said, withdraw your application, update your application, etc. So I went in and updated and made it a little snappier. And then I sat for another year. And in June of 2021, I watched senators be appointed in New Brunswick and Quebec and in Ontario. And of course, we were coming into the 2021 fall election, federal election. And so many of us, I was thinking, Prime Minister, let's get appointing some senators before the election takes place, and other appointments. Judges are appointed. There's lots of reasons to get appointments done before an election. So my husband and I were away. We were on the West Coast. I was sitting one morning having a coffee, and I must add, I never assumed that this was going to come my way at all. Nobody was more surprised than me. What I wanted was to know that the appointments had been made so I could forget about it and move on to whatever else my next thing was going to be. I desperately just wanted senators in Alberta to be named, and then I could figure out what was next for me. Anyway, I got a phone call from a man in Ottawa saying that they wanted to have a conversation with me about my application. It was a follow-up 2-hour interview that 1-hour interview that afternoon with 2 women from the Prime Minister's office. That was more vetting questions, etc. And through that whole conversation, they kept saying, "This means nothing. This is nothing." And I'm like, okay. So I think my husband was out golfing or something. So when he got back, I said, "This is crazy." I said, "My application is sitting on somebody's desk." So I had no idea how the process went after that. I could speculate, but it's pretty hard to know exactly how you get from the application to that conversation to the actual appointment. So we then actually traveled we were out on Salt Spring it was several days later, like 5-6 days later. And I got another phone call from the same man saying we would like to schedule an important follow-up call. So again, I'm like, oh, okay. That sounds promising. So I had said to him, "May I ask who I'll be speaking with?" And he said, "Well, you can ask, but we're pretty light on the details over here." So I didn't exactly know who I'd be speaking with, but I assumed I may be speaking with the Prime Minister. So at the appropriate time, I received a phone call and a woman came on the line saying that it was the switchboard operator for the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister would like to speak with me. And he asked if I would accept the position of Senator for Alberta in the Canadian Senate. And I graciously accepted. Then we had a 15-minute conversation. And I will say at the end of that conversation, I said, "Prime Minister, when we finish our conversation, can I assume that somebody else is going to call me and tell me what to do next?" And he was very gracious and very funny. And so that is an excellent question. And yeah, she'll be getting a call in about 15 minutes. So then we had to keep it secret for a week because being asked and accepting it, there's stuff that has to happen between then and the formal announcement. And so it was announced on July 29th that I had been appointed.
So it's almost your 1 year, your first anniversary of being a senator.
Just past my 1 year in this job.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. I'm thinking, oh yeah, it's totally July, but no, it's definitely August.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so you got the call from the Prime Minister and then you asked the right question about receiving follow-up. And then, okay, so I'm very curious. So you are appointed, it's a secret until it's announced publicly. And then, like what happens? Do you have to fly to Ottawa? Is there someone, who is like, is it like the, the first day of school and someone's waiting at the door for you and they're like, this is your office and this is the Senate and, what happens? Okay.
So first and foremost, the first thing I had to do was step down as mayor. So once appointed officially, I couldn't be the mayor. So I had to resign as mayor, which I did at the appropriate time a couple of days before. Sort of the day before we knew the public announcement was coming out. Because once I give the town manager my letter of resignation, he or she has to accept it right then. And so we had to make sure the timing was right. And the town wanted to do a press release, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to step down as mayor immediately. For me, I am incredibly grateful of that timing. First and foremost, the Senate at that time was on summer recess, as is the House, which means all the senators are home in their own provinces and territories and working from there, but they're not required to be in Ottawa. So I wasn't required to be in Ottawa right that minute. Then the Prime Minister called an election. So the House and the Senate don't sit during an election. So I actually, from July until I was sworn in November, was able to do most of my work and my introduction and my orientation from home. I selected my office through online videos. I hired my first staff, my executive assistant, through Zoom and through HR. So then my husband and I did fly out to Ottawa in September and did some paperwork and saw my office, met my EA, et cetera, et cetera. But I was not technically sworn in until the following November. So that was, again, a great way to be introduced to it. There are senators who are appointed on a Friday, and they need to be in the chamber on Monday. So that was not my story, and I'm very grateful for it. And I feel I had a real opportunity to learn as much as I possibly could through meetings and paper before actually walking into that chamber. Yeah, that to me was a gift. I will say, I did go into the chamber with Karsten and my staff, and that's a pretty emotional moment when you walk in there and go, holy cow. I wonder where my chair is going to be. Yeah, no, when you walk in and you're there to work and you're there to listen to legislation and listen to statements and listen to debate, nobody's holding your hand. And yeah, I mean, I did have an interesting background in terms of at least understanding motions and amendments and et cetera, but it is a completely different animal than anything I have ever experienced. And I also will just take a moment to say my colleagues in the Senate are truly an extraordinary group of people. They are everyday Canadians. We are gender balanced, absolutely. There is a very high degree of diversity, and I mean that in every sense of the word, in the Senate. And there are varied backgrounds: lawyers, judges, journalists, scientists, doctors. I'll just use a general term, environmentalists. Very broad spectrum of people who sit in that room to provide sober second thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sober second thought is really important. I think in terms of, especially when the politics in Canada, I would say, is increasingly complicated, but the Senate plays a very important role. That being said, in Alberta, everything related to the Senate is a little bit more complicated just because of our own unique perspective on it in terms of having election. It's just, it's another beast. But I appreciate the multi-partisan or non-partisan aspect of it. And I think that truly serves all Canadians in the best way possible, because not everything should be partisan and not everything should be political. So yeah, I share your hope that one day it is a truly independent Senate, and that the partisan politics can be removed from it.
Yeah, it is still in my mind, unfortunately, still very pertinent in the chamber in terms of question period, etc. I support a non-elected Senate. It doesn't make any sense to me, for the purpose of what the Senate is to be, behooven to people who elected you. And I do think the appointment process is fairer. I think it allows for much greater diversity. And the fact that it isn't just a prime minister appointing, it's a group of people from the province or the territory where they're appointing from, and then a secondary group who sit in Ottawa, and they present the suggested appointments to the prime minister with their rationale. So it's everyday Canadians and a group of them who are putting the appointments before the Governor General and the Prime Minister. And, I don't mean to minimize this at all, but to me, in some ways, I can explain the role a little bit further, we're almost a focus group of 105 Canadians from across this country with diverse backgrounds who look at legislation and go, yeah, that doesn't feel quite right to me. Maybe we want to look at amending that and then sending it back to the House. So that's how I see it. That's how I see my role. And while not everybody in the chamber and the country agrees with that, or in this province, it's certainly, to me, the best way for us to have this upper chamber and have a group of people to provide sober second thought to legislation.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be I don't think it's possible for there to be a consensus on one way of appointing senators in Canada. I come from, my personal belief is that disagreement is okay, and that creates a better discussion. When you have just groupthink, that's rather dangerous, because there's no one saying, hey, I don't agree with this. There has to be space for that. So, I think all of these conversations are healthy and should be, welcome. And, but so now, so we've had 1 year of your first year of being a senator. So the Senate has been, do you say that the Senate is in session just in the same way that the House is?
Yeah, that is the right term. I tend to use the term sitting, and not everybody seems to always understand exactly what I'm saying. But for whatever reason, that's the language that I find my using. We're not sitting, we are sitting. We'll be sitting in September. But in session would be
in sessions, sitting. Yes. And so, what was that first session like for you?
There was a few of us who were appointed at the same time, and a few more who had been appointed just a month before us. But there was one woman particularly, she had been the mayor of Cornwall and had been appointed at the same time. And we just both kept looking down the table at each other going, wait, what? Like, what are we doing here? So it was strange. It was very strange. That first week, I didn't understand why people were just getting up and talking about things that just kind of interest them off, that were important to them personally. Well, those are statements, and there's a period where you're allowed to make statements about people or things that are important in your province or in your community, but I didn't understand it. And then we went to, I have never been in a question period. I didn't even know we would have a question period, but we do. And there is a government leader who is a senator who does, one person, and he actually has two others that work with him who are senators who do support the government specifically. So the question period is constantly just at this one Senator Mark Gold, and I was sitting there going, why is everybody just asking that man questions? Why are they so angry?
Why are they so angry? So that's a very big question.
So I had to sort of figure that piece out. And then I just, it was just a very different process and way of operating an agenda than that I was used to. It's very verbal. Whatever we're talking about, there's different times for amount of time that different people can speak depending on the situation. So sometimes somebody would get up and speak for 45 minutes. Sometimes somebody was called at 15 minutes. It was very confusing, to say the least. And again, I considered myself fairly knowledgeable about process, but it's just a completely different process. But eventually learn. And I learned very quickly one of those things we get that's really helpful. They're called scroll notes. And so they're cheat sheets saying, okay, here's what's going to happen. And here's how long we're going to talk about this. And this is who's talking. And if we have a minister in, here's who's going to be asking this minister questions. You sign up. So that's interesting. Not to complete it or make it too complicated. But the other thing I had to learn about is there actually are 4 senators groups, and you join a group. And the purpose in joining a group is that each group has staff and you have colleagues. But to your point, and I want to make this very clear, nobody is whipped. So nobody is told how to vote on anything. And even if in your group that you sit in, there seems to be a common thinking around how this should go or how it shouldn't go, as an independent senator, you do not have to vote as your group does. So I think it gets too complicated. We probably don't have the time to get into the groups. I'm in the independent senators group. There's a progressive senators group, there's a Canadian senators group, and there's a conservative senators group. And you can go online and consider what they all are. The independent senators group is certainly the largest, but I think what's important is to point out that everybody in the room is actually independent and can vote as they wish to. And then in terms of the Senate, then you also get assigned to committees. And there's 19 different committees. And I put my 2 favorite forward, and I got them both now to learn that they're both very complicated committees, but that's okay. So
which 2 are they?
The energy, environment, and natural resources.
Oh yeah, those are,
So that's one committee. And then the second one I'm on is transportation and communication, which I find so funny. And if you're wondering why transportation and communication are together, it goes back to the days of the rail and Morse code. And so clearly transportation and communication. And the reason I picked that one, that was as close as I could get to tourism. There's really no tourism committee per se. So both those committees, I just got through a very heavy piece of legislation with NEV, as we call it. That was my first clause by clause legislation in committee, and I'm moving into C11. Some of your listeners may be following that. It's the broadcasting bill, and actually, people like you would be quite interested in that. So I'm going to see that as well. And then, just in addition, there's working groups. So a senator may say, I want to have a working group on. So Paula Simons in Edmonton, she's created a working group on how municipalities can work closer with the federal government. So I joined that. I'm on an immigration working group because I'm very interested in terms of immigration at all levels. And I sit on Senators for Climate Action working group. And that's more educational. Speakers come in, you have discussions. It's kind of on a more personal level. And then I was thrilled to receive a call not too far down the road from the Minister of Tourism's office, Randy Boissonneau, asking if I would co-chair an interparliamentary nonpartisan tourism caucus. So the Senate and the House are both involved in this caucus. I have a co-chair, Patrick Wheeler, who is from the Sunshine Coast, and we see our job as advocating and lifting tourism up and starting to look at some of the really crucial issues that the industry is facing, which of course I'm thrilled by, because that is the one room that I feel completely comfortable in and I know what I'm talking about. So I was really delighted. And in my head, I thought, well, I've got to start a tourism committee sometime here. And of course, this sort of landed in my lap. So I'm very grateful to the minister and to both the House and the Senate for participating and lifting this industry up.
Well, I think that speaks to the need and the necessity of diversity and representation, not just in the Senate, but like every level of elected government, because when you have people from different backgrounds, not just, where someone might be from, but also, what their professional background is and their lived experience in different capacities, then you have different conversations, and you can you have a lens on things that not everyone else has. And in those critical moments, you can put up your hand and say, yeah, this actually won't work for this industry, or this is the problem with this issue, or yeah, this is a great opportunity because, right. And so when you have a body, anybody, they come from the same background and they have all the, very similar lived experience, then you don't get those people putting their hands up and saying like, hey, this is a problem.
Absolutely. And hearing perspective, it's funny. I learned this, I would say, at the municipal table. I was always happiest, you go into a vote or you look at an agenda, you're going to be voting on something, and you of course you have an idea of how you're going to vote on something, although you're supposed to go to the table open-minded. And I was always really happy when I found my mind changed at the table. And when you're the mayor and the chair, that's sometimes a bit of a fluster because you're trying not to call the question because you haven't quite decided what you're doing. But I used to always and continue, and hopefully in this role too, will continue to say exactly what you just said. Hey, wait a minute. That never occurred to me because that's not my life, or that's not who I am, but oh, wow, that's super interesting. I may need to change my vote based on that argument you just presented. And I think when any politician, elected or not, is even at a board level, if somebody is, thinks they're going to vote one way and they have their mind changed at the table, I think that speaks highly of you. I think it tells the rest of the group that you're open-minded and that you just heard something that you didn't know before.
Well, I think it's really, in my opinion, especially in the way that politics is rapidly evolving globally and domestically in Canada, is, you hear people about taking positions and then there's no openness to have a conversation or a dialogue. And I see great danger in that. And so being open to moving on an issue, that's not a weakness, in my opinion. I see that as a strength.
And again, the beauty of not being whipped.
Yeah.
I can't imagine in the history of any government in this country where the participants are whipped, that there hasn't been people along the way going, well,
and there's also no money, there's no money involved because you weren't fundraising for a campaign.
Right. Right.
which
Right.
is a very important element as well. Money in politics can be very problematic. It's not all innocent. So yeah, I agree.
And I would add, just back to the election in Alberta, if there are people who have been elected, and I think in Alberta they're referred to as senators in waiting, I hope they've applied. And I hope they put in their application, that they were successful in a provincial election on this. And a wise person said to me that would be the smartest move for them.
Yeah, I definitely.
That would if you were elected in the province, that would have some merit on your application.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really lovely conversation, and I really appreciate having it with you. And I look forward the next time you're in Calgary. Please stop by, and hopefully I would love to be here when you're here.
Yes.
And I know that you can potentially have a matching moment actually with your fellow Senator Kim Pate, because I know you both have the Woman's Place sweaters, and she was on the podcast a month or two ago, and we had a really just an incredible conversation about her work going back decades about issues in correctional facilities. And as someone who has a degree in social justice, it was like, it's one of my love languages is talking about the social justice system in Canada and criminal justice.
You'll be happy to know a couple of things. First of all, Senator Pate is going to be in Alberta next week. I am meeting with her, and Senator Simons and her and I are going to a women's correctional facility in Edmonton.
Oh, that's awesome.
I have never been in a correctional facility, and that's what we're going to do. Personally, I'm then going to zip over to Métis Crossing, which is an excellent Indigenous tourism opportunity we have here in Alberta. And I will come in, and I'm embarrassed to say I haven't been in. I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. I just have watched you grow into this, and really on social media. But it's fantastic. And I will mention, actually, I have my staff coming in to do several meetings in Calgary and Southern Alberta that week of September 5th. So I'm going to reach out to you and find out what days you're open and when you'll be there. Yeah. And we will come in for photo ops.
I will. Who was it? There was actually just, there was an energy conference in Calgary recently, Penwar, which brought a lot of people in. And, there was a senator from Yukon who stopped by. I wasn't, unfortunately. Yes, it was Pat Duncan who stopped by that day. I wasn't here, unfortunately, but Kennedy, who was working that day, was absolutely ecstatic that she was, that she met a senator.
Yeah, Pat used to be the Premier of the Yukon, and she's the only senator in the Yukon, which is, again, we get into numbers and and who has how many senators. But that's another conversation. And Sarah, anytime, like if there's a piece of legislation that seems interesting to you,
I'd love that.
You want to know how I'm doing 2 years from now? I would be happy to come on and join you again. I would look forward to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, being in Calgary and you representing, the Alberta Rockies, I consider you my senator as well. So
thank you very much. Yeah. That is great.
Yes.
And yes, we'll be in to see you sooner than later.
That would be lovely. Well, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time today.
No problem. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.